The Morrison household had always been a picture of prosperity and harmony. Fidelis Morrison, a successful contract manager, lived contentedly with his wife Maura, their daughters Nora and Sonia, and their devoted housekeeper Clara. Their spacious home reflected years of hard work and careful planning, filled with laughter and the comfortable rhythm of family life. Everything changed the day Nora brought home a stranger. It started innocently enough. Nora, their spirited teenage daughter who had spent years being raised by relatives in the United States, claimed the girl was her schoolmate. Emanuela appeared at their doorstep, a small, seemingly helpless child with tears streaming down her face and a story of abuse that tugged at every heartstring. "My uncle and his wife beat me and threw me out," she sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured vulnerability. Maura's maternal instincts warred with her intuition. Something about this girl felt wrong, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. The way Emanuela's eyes darted around their home, cataloging everything. The calculated timing of her tears. The too perfect helplessness. But Fidelis, ever the compassionate man, couldn't turn away a child in need. "I'll take you back to your uncle's house," he declared. "I'll make sure this is resolved." When they arrived at the address Emanuela provided, the house stood abandoned, its gate locked, windows dark. Fidelis knocked and called out, but only silence answered. The neighbors knew nothing of any family living there. "We'll come back later," Fidelis decided, his protective nature overriding his wife's growing concerns. That evening, as Emanuela, or Ella, as Fidelis began calling her, sat in their living room, Maura watched her husband's behavior shift in ways both subtle and alarming. His attention, once divided equally among his children, now focused intensely on this stranger. He offered her the best seat, the choicest food, asked repeatedly what would make her happy. Sonia, their younger daughter, confronted Ella in the hallway when no one else was watching. "What are you doing in this house?" she demanded, her young voice sharp with wisdom beyond her years. Ella's innocent facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something ancient and malevolent beneath. "I know this is your house, but I must inform you that I own the man of this house and everything that belongs to him, including you." The words hung in the air like a curse, and Sonia felt a chill run through her bones. This was no ordinary child. This was something else entirely, something dark that had infiltrated their home with a purpose. That night, Maura lay awake beside her husband, listening to his breathing and wondering what force had entered their lives. She thought of Sonia, whom they had adopted years ago under similar circumstances, a blessing who had brought them nothing but good fortune. But this girl was different. Where Sonia had brought light, Emanuela carried shadows. In her room, Nora tossed and turned, already regretting her impulsive decision to invite her friend inside. She hadn't known what would happen, couldn't have predicted how this single act would unravel the carefully woven tapestry of their family life. And in the guest room, Emanuela smiled in the darkness, her mission just beginning. The transformation of Fidelis Morrison didn't happen overnight, but when it began, it moved with the inexorable force of a landslide. It started with small things. Fidelis forgot to buy the pizza he'd promised Nora. When she mentioned it, he snapped at her with uncharacteristic harshness. "Your mother and I know what everyone needs and the right time to get them," he barked, his voice cold and unfamiliar. Maura intervened, defending their daughter, but the damage was done. The easy affection between father and daughter had developed its first crack. Then came the preferential treatment that grew more blatant with each passing day. Fidelis brought home gifts, but only for Ella. Expensive dolls, new clothes, treats that his own daughters hadn't received in months. When questioned, he grew defensive and angry. "She is my only daughter," he declared one evening, his words cutting through Maura like shards of glass. "What about Sonia and Nora?" Maura demanded, her voice rising with disbelief. "What about your own children?" "I know who my daughter is," Fidelis responded, his eyes glazed with something that wasn't quite his own will. The household staff noticed the changes too. Clara, the housekeeper who had worked for the Morrisons for years, watched in growing alarm as her employer showered the strange girl with attention while neglecting his family. She saw how Ella would whisper to Fidelis when no one was watching, how he would emerge from these conversations with a dazed expression and altered behavior. One afternoon, Fidelis announced he was taking Ella shopping at the most expensive stores in the city. Mara reminded him that school was resuming soon and their daughters needed supplies, uniforms, and books. "I don't have money to waste on those kids right now," Fidelis said flatly. "My priority is Ella, my beautiful daughter." Mara stared at the stranger who wore her husband's face. This wasn't the man she'd married, the devoted father who had once put his children's needs above everything else. This was something else. The situation reached a breaking point when Mara confronted Ella directly. She found the girl in the living room, sitting with an air of ownership that made Mara's blood boil. "You little rat," Mara hissed, her usual composure cracking. "I don't know what you have done to my husband. Now go out there and remove the spell you cast on him." Ella's response chilled her to the bone. "Let those who seek freedom set themselves free. And to him who enjoys captivity, there he shall remain." Before Mara could respond, Fidelis appeared, his face contorted with rage. For the first time in their marriage, he raised his hand to his wife. The slap never landed. Mara stumbled backward in shock, but the intention was clear. "Don't you ever speak to my daughter that way," he snarled. That night, Mara gathered her daughters close. Sonia, wise beyond her years, squeezed her mother's hand. "Something is not right in this house, and I know it. But don't worry, everything will be fine soon." But Nora, racked with guilt over bringing Ella into their home, couldn't find comfort. She had caused this. Her stubbornness, her impulsive decision to invite a stranger inside, had opened the door to whatever dark force now controlled her father. In her room, Ella hummed a tuneless melody, her mission progressing exactly as planned. The man was under her control. Now it was time to deepen the curse, to watch this family destroy itself from within. Fidelis Morrison's behavior spiraled from concerning to bizarre with alarming speed. The successful contract manager who had always dressed impeccably for work began showing up at his office in increasingly strange attire. First came the traditional outfit. Fidelis arrived at work dressed in full ceremonial regalia, complete with beads and ancestral symbols. His colleagues stared in disbelief as he proclaimed himself a high chief, speaking of coronations and kingdoms that existed only in his bewitched mind. "I am a son of the ancestors," he announced grandly, gesturing at his outfit. "I have decided to represent them through my appearance." His business partner, visiting the office that day, took one look at Fidelis and promptly withdrew all his contracts. "May God forbid I give you any of my projects to handle," he said, backing away slowly. But Fidelis seemed oblivious to the professional damage he was causing. When his manager confronted him about the dress code violations, he became aggressive, insisting that his ancestral heritage took precedence over company policy. The next day brought an even more alarming transformation. Fidelis dressed as a palm wine tapper, complete with climbing rope and traditional tools. He spoke endlessly about the noble occupation of his forefathers, about how palm wine flowed through his veins instead of blood. "I am the best palm wine tapper in this kingdom," he declared to bewildered office workers. "When the king needed wine for festivals, he called upon me." His manager watched in horror as another potential client fled the premises. The contracts that had once flowed freely to Fidelis's firm dried up overnight. His reputation, built over years of hard work and professionalism, crumbled in days. At home, the situation grew even more disturbing. Fidelis began insisting the family eat meals prepared over an open fire in their backyard, sitting on the ground in the ways of the ancestors. He forced Clara to help him build a fire pit, threatening her job when she hesitated. The breaking point came when he declared himself a hunter. Armed with a rented rifle and dressed in hunting garb, he insisted he needed to go into the bush to hunt game for the ancestors. Mara, watching her husband parade around with a loaded weapon, felt terror grip her heart. "Baby, you can't go out like this," she pleaded. "Get out," he roared, pointing the rifle in her general direction. "Do not stand in the way of my ancestors, else I will hunt you down like an antelope." He stormed out, leaving Mara trembling and Clara wringing her hands in despair. Hours later, he returned empty-handed and enraged, blaming everyone in the household for his failure to find any game. "You are bad luck," he screamed at Mara and their daughters. "You caused me bad luck. I scanned the forest, I searched everywhere, but I found nothing. If I don't see any bush meat, I will sacrifice you to the ancestors. The once loving father had become a stranger, unpredictable and dangerous. His daughters cowered in their rooms while Maura tried desperately to think of a solution. Every attempt to reason with him ended in rage. Every plea for him to seek help was met with accusations and threats. Through it all, Ella watched with satisfaction, her power over Fidelis complete. She had turned a respected businessman into a laughingstock, a devoted father into a tyrant, a loving husband into a threat. And this was only the beginning. As Fidelis descended deeper into his bewitched state, the family structure that had once been their foundation began to crumble. Maura tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but every day brought fresh humiliation. Her husband, who had once provided generously for their household, now refused to give her money for basic necessities. When she asked for funds to stock the kitchen, he interrogated her suspiciously, as if she were a stranger trying to steal from him. The only exception was Ella. For her, Fidelis's wallet was always open. He showered her with gifts, took her on expensive shopping trips, and catered to her every whim. When Ella casually mentioned she didn't want to attend school, that education was for kids and she was not one of them, Fidelis simply agreed, redirecting the money he'd saved for her tuition into more shopping sprees. Meanwhile, Nora and Sonia's school fees remained unpaid. Their uniforms grew shabby, their school supplies ran low, but their father seemed not to notice or care. The disparity reached a breaking point one afternoon over something as simple as soft drinks. Fidelis had brought home beverages for the children, but Ella received a much larger bottle than the others. When Nora pointed out the unfairness, Maura tried to smooth things over by promising to buy them bigger bottles. I don't understand what is going on, Maura confronted Fidelis privately. Why are you making your children feel like you don't love them? Why are you projecting all your love only on Ella? I love my kids, Fidelis insisted, but his words rang hollow. I say it again, I love my kids. Then prove it, Maura demanded. Show them. Prove to them in front of Ella that you love your children. But Fidelis couldn't, or wouldn't. The spell that bound him ran too deep. The tension in the household affected everyone. Clara, the housekeeper, found herself caught between loyalty to Maura and fear of Fidelis's increasingly erratic behavior. She watched helplessly as the family she'd served for years tore itself apart. Sonia, despite her young age, seemed to understand the supernatural nature of their situation. She confronted Ella multiple times, warning her that darkness would not prevail over light. "A million of your type is not a quarter of my ability," she declared with unusual maturity. "I have a bad feeling about you living in this house because you're here to cause us pain and sorrow, but that will never happen." Ella merely smiled, unbothered by Sonia's threats. She knew her power over Fidelis was absolute. The breaking point came when Nora fell ill. Weak and feverish, she lay in bed while Clara tried her best to care for her with limited resources. When Sonia went to ask their father for money to buy medicine, he refused coldly. "I don't have money to give anybody," he snapped. "But my sister is sick," Sonia pleaded. "I don't want to lose my only sister." "You lose your life if you don't live here," Fidelis responded, his face twisted with an anger that wasn't entirely his own. "Get out." Desperate, Clara used her own meager savings to buy medicine for Nora. As she fed the sick girl soup and administered the medication, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer this household could survive. The man who had once been a generous, caring employer had become a stranger, cold, cruel, and completely under the control of a child who was no child at all. In her room, Ella hummed contentedly. The family was fracturing exactly as planned. Soon, there would be nothing left to save. Maura Morrison had always been a woman of strength and grace, but even the strongest materials have their breaking point. That point came on a seemingly ordinary afternoon when she found herself standing in her own kitchen, no longer recognizing the life she'd built. The house that had once been filled with laughter now echoed with tension and fear. Her husband wandered around in bizarre costumes, ranting about ancestors and traditions that he'd never mentioned in 20 years of marriage. Her daughter lay ill upstairs while another daughter wrestled with guilt over bringing catastrophe into their home. And through it all, Ella moved like a queen through conquered territory, her satisfaction barely concealed. When More tried to assert her authority as lady of the house, Fidelis turned on her with venom. "It is not in your jurisdiction to decide who stays or lives in this house," he snarled, physically blocking her path when she tried to send Ella away. The confrontation escalated until Fidelis raised his hand to his wife, not just threatening this time, but actually striking her. The slap echoed through the house like a gunshot, and in that moment, something inside Mara shattered. She stumbled backward, more from shock than pain. In 20 years of marriage, Fidelis had never laid a hand on her in anger. This man, this creature wearing her husband's face, was a stranger. That night, unable to bear the situation any longer, Mara made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. She left. Not permanently, perhaps. Not forever. But she needed distance from the madness, space to think clearly without the oppressive atmosphere of her own home suffocating her. She packed a small bag and walked out into the night. What happened next would become a blur in everyone's memory, a descent into chaos so rapid and complete that it seemed almost supernatural in its thoroughness. Mara, the strong and capable woman who had managed a household and supported her husband's career for 2 decades, began to unravel. She wandered the streets of their neighborhood, her expensive clothes becoming rumpled and dirty. Her carefully maintained appearance dissolved into dishevelment. Her coherent thoughts fractured into disconnected phrases. Within days, the neighbors who had once envied the Morrison family's success began to whisper about the woman roaming the streets, talking to herself, laughing at invisible jokes, crying for reasons no one could understand. "Is that Mara Morrison?" they asked each other, shocked. "She's gone mad," others responded, shaking their heads. "She's lost her mind completely." Clara found her fast, sitting by the compound gate as if trying to remember how to open it. "I am the gate," Mara mumbled, her eyes unfocused. "I can open the gate. I can close the gate." The housekeeper's heart broke at the sight. This brilliant, dignified woman reduced to confusion and incoherence, it was too cruel to comprehend. When Clara managed to bring Mara home, Fidelis's reaction was perhaps the most telling sign of his possession. He showed no concern for his wife's condition, no alarm at her obvious mental break. Instead, he grew angry, as if her madness was an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. "Are you mad?" he shouted at Clara. "Why did you let her into this compound?" Even more disturbing was Mara's own behavior when she saw him. There was recognition in her eyes, brief, flickering moments when she seemed to understand who he was, but mostly there was fear. She cowered away from the man she'd once loved, as if he were a stranger or a threat. The family that had once been whole was now completely fractured, and at the center of the destruction sat Ella, watching with ancient, satisfied eyes. While his family life disintegrated, Fidelis's professional reputation followed suit. The contract manager who had once been the most sought after in his field became a cautionary tale whispered about in business circles. His manager at the firm had tried to be patient, had attempted to understand what seemed like a nervous breakdown or midlife crisis. But when Fidelis continued to show up to the office in costume, first as a chief, then as a palm wine tapper, then as a hunter, patience wore thin. "Mr. Fidelis, I heard you came to the office with a little kid," the manager said during one of these bizarre episodes, referring to Ella, whom Fidelis had brought to work. "What is she doing here?" "That's my beautiful daughter," Fidelis responded proudly, seemingly unaware of the company's strict policy against children in the workplace. "I believe before you resumed office in this company, you signed a contract," the manager reminded him firmly. "One of the laws states no kids in our working premises." But Fidelis was beyond caring about contracts or policies. His priorities had been completely reordered by the spell that controlled him. Ella's wishes took precedence over everything: his job, his reputation, his future. The final straw came during a scheduled meeting with major clients. Fidelis arrived dressed in full hunting regalia, carrying his rented rifle and speaking about ancestral obligations. The clients took one look at him and fled. "Mr. Fidelis, are you the one calling shots in this office, or am I?" the manager demanded. "Today is our hunting day, and I represent the ancestors," Fidelis replied seriously, as if this explained everything. "Don't you go to church?" "To the mosque," the manager asked desperately. "Can I see your pastor?" "You are mad," Fidelis shouted. we go hunting. So go dress into your hunting attire, or I will shoot you like an antelope. The manager backed away, genuinely frightened. This wasn't eccentricity or a breakdown, this was something far more concerning. He made a decision that he'd been putting off for weeks. Mr. Fidelis, you have failed in handling 2 major contracts this organization assigned to you, he said formally. As an organization, we can no longer refer any contracts to you. You have to go out and source your own contract yourself. The words, which should have devastated Fidelis, barely registered. He was too deep in his bewitched state to understand what he'd lost. The successful career he'd built over decades, the professional relationships he'd cultivated, the reputation he'd earned, all of it gone in a matter of weeks. When he finally returned home, still dressed in his hunting costume, even he seemed momentarily confused. "Why am I dressed like this?" he asked Mara, who was having one of her rare lucid moments. "I got to the office and I realized I was dressed like this. What is wrong with me?" But these moments of clarity were brief, quickly swallowed by the curse that held him. Within minutes, he was raging again, blaming Mara for not preventing him from leaving the house in costume, accusing her of failing in her wifely duties. The financial implications of his job loss would take time to fully manifest, but the immediate impact was clear. The Morrison family had gone from prosperity to precarity in the span of a few weeks. Bills began to pile up. Savings dwindled. The comfortable lifestyle they'd enjoyed for years was slipping away. And through it all, Ella remained, the cause of all this destruction, enjoying the chaos she'd created. As the curse tightened its grip on the Morrison household, even the innocent suffered. Nora's illness, which had started as a simple fever, worsened dramatically. She lay in bed, weak and pale, her body burning with fever that medicine couldn't touch. Clara did her best to care for the girl, feeding her small amounts of soup and administering medication purchased with her own meager wages. But as days passed without improvement, even the dedicated housekeeper began to lose hope. "She needs more than medicine," Clara whispered to Sonia one evening. "This sickness isn't natural." Sonia, wise beyond her years, nodded grimly. She had known from the beginning that Ella's presence would bring suffering, but she hadn't expected it to manifest this way, in physical illness that drained her sister's life force day by day. Mara, in her lucid moments, would wander to Nora's bedside, her face etched with anguish. "My daughter," she would murmur, stroking Nora's hot forehead. But then the madness would reclaim her, and she would wander away, lost in confusion again. The most painful aspect was Fidelis's complete indifference. When told his daughter was seriously ill, he showed no concern. His response was to bring more gifts for Ella, to take her on more shopping trips, to cater to her every whim while his biological daughter suffered. One afternoon, during one of his increasingly rare moments of clarity, Fidelis looked around his home as if seeing it for the first time. His wife wandered the compound talking to herself. His daughter lay ill upstairs. His other daughter watched him with eyes full of pain and disappointment. His career was in ruins. His bank accounts were nearly empty. "What is happening to me?" he asked, the empty air, genuine confusion in his voice. "What have I done?" But before he could pursue these thoughts, Ella appeared. She said nothing, just looked at him with those ancient eyes, and immediately the fog descended again. The questions faded. The concern evaporated. Only his devotion to this strange child remained. Clara, watching this interaction from the kitchen doorway, felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen many things in her years of service to various families, but never anything like this. This wasn't mental illness or a midlife crisis. This was something supernatural, something evil that had taken root in a good man's mind. One evening, as she prepared food for Nora, Ella appeared in the kitchen. The girl moved with a confidence that was disturbing in someone so young, touching things, examining the pots and pans as if she owned them. "I want to eat," Ella announced. "The food is for Nora," Clara responded firmly. "She's sick and needs to eat to take her medicine." Ella's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something cold and ancient. "I said I want to eat." The confrontation escalated until Clara, protecting the food intended for her sick charge, found herself in a physical altercation with a child who seemed to possess strength far beyond her small frame. Pots crashed to the floor. Food scattered. And when Maura appeared, drawn by the noise, she punished not Ella, but Clara. She tried to deny Ella food, Maura declared during one of her moments of twisted lucidity, where the curse controlling Fidelis seemed to touch her as well. Ella must eat first, always. The household had become a nightmare where normal rules no longer applied, where right and wrong had inverted, where suffering was ignored and evil was rewarded. On the night of the full moon, something shifted in the spiritual realm. Sonia, who had been watching and waiting, knew the time had come to act. Despite her young age, Sonia possessed knowledge and abilities that set her apart. She had never been an ordinary child. Her adoption by the Morrison family years earlier had been orchestrated by forces beyond human understanding. She was a guardian, a protector sent to bring blessings to a deserving family. And she had recognized Ella for what she was from the very first moment. Under the moon's silver light, Sonia confronted Ella in the compound. "It's time to end this drama and return home," she declared, her voice carrying a weight and authority that belied her years. Ella's innocent facade finally dropped completely. "You don't have to do this to me, Sonia. I am your sister." "Never," Sonia responded firmly. "You are not my sister. You are darkness, and I am a child of light." What followed was a battle not of physical strength but of spiritual power. Ella revealed her true story, how she had once been human, a woman named Emanuela whose husband had died after being betrayed by his best friend. "I was pregnant when my husband died," Ella's voice changed, deepening with the pain of old wounds. "His friend, Fidelis, had 15 million naira but refused to help us with just 200,000 for medical bills. My wife died. My unborn child died. And Fidelis went on living his happy life. The curse had been born from that betrayal and grief. A man named David, destroyed by the loss of his pregnant wife, had sought supernatural vengeance. He had gone to dark spiritual powers and made a terrible bargain, his own life in exchange for the complete destruction of Fidelis Morrison and his family. I was just ill-fitted on the day of my arrival," Ella explained, her form beginning to shift and shimmer in the moonlight. "I was affected by the curse. I was manipulated by dark powers." But Sonia was not moved. "Someone wasn't able to help you, and that's why you want to wipe out his entire family. Children who had nothing to do with what happened." Under the full moon's power, with Sonia's spiritual authority pushing back against the darkness, the curse began to break. Ella's true form became visible, not a child but a spiritual entity, trapped and twisted by rage and grief into something monstrous. "You were used," Sonia told her, almost gently now. "The pain of loss turned you into an instrument of revenge, but this isn't who you really are." As Sonia spoke ancient words of power, calling on forces of light to break the curse, Ella's hold on the Morrison family finally shattered. The dark tendrils that had connected her to Fidelis snapped. The fog that had clouded his mind lifted. The madness that had gripped Maura began to recede. In the house, Fidelis suddenly gasped as if waking from a nightmare. What happened to me?" he whispered, looking at his strange clothing in horror and confusion. Maura, wandering in the streets, stopped mid-step, her mind suddenly clearing like fog burned away by sunlight. She looked around, confused and disoriented, but for the first time in weeks, her thoughts were her own. Back in the compound, under the full moon's watchful gaze, Ella's form continued to shimmer and shift. The innocent child facade had completely dissolved, revealing the tortured spirit beneath, a woman who had lost everything and had been consumed by the desire for vengeance. "Thank you for setting me free," Ella whispered, her voice now fully adult, full of pain and regret. The dark powers that had controlled her were being expelled by Sonia's spiritual authority, and with them went the rage that had sustained her mission of destruction. Sonia stood firm, her small frame somehow radiating an otherworldly light. "You must leave this place. But before we do that, we have a mission to accomplish." Together, the two spiritual entities, one of light, one freed from darkness, worked to fully restore what had been broken. The curse had to be completely lifted, the damage undone as much as possible, the family healed. As dawn approached, Fidelis found himself standing in his bedroom, staring at his reflection in horror. He was dressed in hunting clothes, a rifle propped in the corner. His last clear memory was, what? Weeks ago. months. Everything in between was a fog of strange compulsions and actions that felt like someone else's memories. He stumbled out of his room to find Clara helping Maura through the front door. His wife looked exhausted, her clothes dirty and torn, but her eyes were clear. When she saw him, she didn't cower or run. She just looked at him with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Maura," he breathed, rushing to her. What happened to you? What happened to us?" "I don't know," she whispered, allowing him to embrace her, though her body remained tense. "I don't remember, everything is so confused." They found Nora in her room, sitting up in bed. Her fever had broken. Color was returning to her cheeks. Sonia sat beside her, holding her hand, and when their parents entered, both girls looked up. "Mom." "Dad," Nora said softly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I brought her here." "Where is she?" Fidelis asked, some part of him already knowing the answer. "Where is Ella?" The days following the curse's breaking were filled with painful revelations and difficult conversations. As the fog of supernatural influence lifted, Fidelis had to confront the full scope of what he'd done under Ella's control. His career was in ruins. His manager was understanding but firm. Fidelis had burned too many bridges, lost too many clients. It would take years to rebuild his reputation, if it could be rebuilt at all. The contracts that had once flowed freely were gone. The financial security he'd worked decades to establish had been decimated in mere weeks. "I sent 15 million naira to a supplier," Fidelis discovered, going through his bank statements with growing horror. "I bought thousands of naira worth of gifts. I rented weapons and costumes. God, what did I do?" Maura sat beside him, her own memories returning in fragments. She remembered wandering the streets, remembered the confusion and fear, but it all felt like a nightmare from which she'd finally awakened. The neighbors who had whispered about her madness now whispered about her miraculous recovery, though none could explain what had happened. "There was a man," Fidelis said one evening, the memory surfacing like something from deep water. "Years ago. David. He was my best friend." The story came out slowly, painfully. David's wife had been pregnant and ill. David had come to Fidelis, desperate for help, just 200,000 naira for medical bills. And Fidelis, who had just sent 15 million naira to a business deal, had refused him. "I didn't have it available at that moment," Fidelis explained, his voice breaking. "I had just sent everything to a supplier. I told him I'd help later, after the money came back. But his wife died," Maura finished softly. "His wife and unborn child both died. And David. I heard he went mad with grief. I lost track of him after that." Fidelis put his head in his hands. "I didn't kill them. But I could have saved them. I had the means. I just didn't have the cash available that exact moment. If I'd known how urgent it was." "You couldn't have known," Maura said, though her voice lacked conviction. "But I should have helped anyway. I should have found a way." Tears streamed down his face. "And so he cursed me. He used dark powers to send that thing into our home. To destroy my family the way his was destroyed." Sonia, listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. The curse wasn't just about David's choice. He was manipulated too. Grief and betrayal made him vulnerable to dark forces that twisted his pain into something evil. "Both of you were victims, in different ways." "Where did she go?" Nora asked from behind Sonia. She had recovered physically, but the guilt of bringing Ella into their home still weighed on her. "Where did Ella go?" "Home," Sonia answered simply. "Back to where she came from. The curse is broken. She's free now. And David. His soul can finally rest. The vengeance he sought brought him no peace, only more darkness. Now that the curse is broken, perhaps he can find the rest he should have found long ago." The family stood together in the room, damaged but whole, facing the long road to recovery. They had lost so much: money, reputation, time, trust. But they had also gained something: understanding of how fragile human connections could be, how a single decision could ripple across years, how darkness could masquerade as innocence. We need to rebuild, Fidelis said finally. Our family, our lives, everything. It won't be easy. No, Maura agreed. But we'll do it together. As a family. 6 months after the curse was broken, the Morrison family stood in their compound, surveying the progress they'd made. The physical restoration of their home had been the easy part: fresh paint, repairs to damage caused during Fidelis's bewitched episodes, new furniture to replace what had been destroyed. The emotional and spiritual restoration was ongoing. Fidelis had slowly begun rebuilding his career. The major contracts were gone, perhaps forever, but he'd started small, taking on projects that other managers deemed too insignificant, proving himself reliable again one job at a time. His reputation as the man who went mad still preceded him, but gradually, a new narrative was forming: the man who had faced inexplicable hardship and come back with humility and determination. I got a call today, he announced at dinner one evening. It's not a major contract, but it's from a client I lost during that time. He's willing to give me a chance again. Maura squeezed his hand, pride evident in her eyes. She had her own healing journey. The trauma of her weeks in madness had left scars. Sometimes she still woke up disoriented, momentarily convinced she was wandering the streets. But therapy and time were helping, and she was stronger for having survived. Nora had changed the most visibly. The guilt she'd carried over bringing Ella into their home had transformed into a profound sense of responsibility. She was more thoughtful now, less impulsive, more aware of the weight that simple decisions could carry. I've been thinking about David's wife, she said one evening. The woman who died because she couldn't get help. How many other people are out there right now, needing help that no one is giving? Her words sparked an idea that had been growing in Fidelis's mind since the curse broke. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, he said slowly. For medical emergencies. For people like David's wife, who die because they need 200,000 naira and can't get it. Using what money? Maura asked gently. They were still recovering financially. We start small. Even helping one person would honor her memory. Would honor what we learned from all of this. As the family discussed the possibilities, Sonia watched with quiet satisfaction. Her mission with the Morrison family was nearing its end. She had been sent to protect them, to bring blessings, and ultimately to break the curse that threatened to destroy them. But she knew her time with them was limited. One evening, as the full moon rose again, Sonia found Fidelis and Maura in the garden. Mom. Dad, she said, using the titles that had become natural over the years. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Something in her tone made them both turn, alarm in their eyes. I'm not of this world, Sonia continued gently. I came here for a day like this, to help your family when you needed it most. But now my mission is complete. No, Maura breathed. Sonia, you're our daughter. You can't leave. I'll always be your daughter, in the ways that matter, Sonia assured her. But I have to go back to where I came from. There are other families who need help. Other darkness to fight. Nora ran to Sonia, wrapping her arms around her sister. I miss you. I miss you so much. And I miss you, my lovely sister, Sonia replied, hugging her back. As the moonlight grew brighter, Sonia's form began to shimmer, just as Ella's had 6 months earlier. But where Ella's transformation had revealed darkness and pain, Sonia's revealed pure light. Remember what you learned, she said as she began to fade. That one decision can change lives. That refusing to help when you can causes ripples you may never see. That darkness can hide in innocent faces, but light can shine even in the smallest gestures. We remember, Fidelis promised, tears streaming down his face. We'll honor what you taught us. And we'll help others, Maura added. We'll make sure no other family suffers like David's did. Sonia smiled, her form now almost completely translucent in the moonlight. The curse brought darkness, but from that darkness came understanding. From destruction came the chance to rebuild better. From loss came the wisdom to value what matters. Will we ever see you again? Nora asked, her voice small. Perhaps, Sonia said. When you're helping someone in need, when you're showing kindness to a stranger, when you're fighting your own darkness with light, I'll be there. Not in body, but in spirit. Always watching, always proud of you. With those final words, Sonia disappeared completely, leaving only a sense of peace and the silver moonlight in her wake. The Morrison family stood together in their garden, mourning the loss of their guardian angel but grateful for the time they'd had. They had been broken and rebuilt, cursed and freed, destroyed and restored. We have work to do, Fidelis said finally, putting his arms around his wife and daughter. A foundation to start. Lives to help. A family to continue healing. And a story to never forget, Mara added. So we never make the same mistakes. As they walked back into their home, truly their home again, free from darkness, the moon shone down on them, benediction and promise combined. The stranger's curse had been broken, but the lessons it taught would last forever. From somewhere unseen, both Sonia and the freed spirit of Emanuela watched, two guardians now at peace. One had brought the curse in pain and manipulation. The other had broken it with love and light. Together, they had taught the Morrison family the most important lesson of all, that every action has consequences, that help given or refused can change destinies, and that even from the darkest curse can come the brightest redemption. The Morrison family would thrive again. Not as they had before, innocent and unaware of life's darker spiritual realities, but wiser, stronger, more compassionate. They would help others avoid the tragedy that had befallen David and his family. They would be lights in the darkness, breaking curses of poverty and desperation one person at a time. And somewhere, watching over them still, two spirits smiled. Years later, the Morrison Foundation would help hundreds of families afford emergency medical care. Nora would become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping vulnerable people avoid exploitation. Fidelis would never achieve his former financial heights, but he would find something more valuable, purpose and redemption. And on nights when the full moon rose, the family would sometimes feel a presence, gentle, loving, protective. They would remember Sonia, their guardian angel, and Emanuela, the tortured spirit freed from darkness. They would remember that evil often wears innocent faces, that curses can be broken, and that from the deepest darkness can emerge the strongest light. The stranger's curse had been meant to destroy them. Instead, it transformed them into vessels of hope for others facing similar darkness. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, challenged your thinking, or made you reflect on your own life, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button right now and join our community of storytellers and truth seekers. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our powerful tales of love, loss, redemption, and the human spirit. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment below telling us what lesson hit home for you. Come back next week for another compelling story that will move your soul. Together, we grow, we learn, we heal. Until next time, choose love over hate, and peace over pride. The end.